The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The room, filled with people waiting for the judge's decision, was almost eerily silent as the small girl stood by the witness stand. Her foster father, a man who had dedicated years of his life to raising her, sat nervously in the front row. He had been through so much with her, but today felt different. Today, the future of their relationship would be decided in a way neither of them could have ever imagined when they first met. It was a cold winter's morning when their paths first crossed. The foster dad, John, had been a volunteer for years, helping with the foster care system in his community. He had always dreamed of having children of his own, but after many years of trying and failing to have biological children, he opened his heart to fostering. John wasn't looking for a perfect child. He simply wanted to offer love, care, and a stable home to a child in need. That's when Emily, a shy 6-year-old girl, entered his life. Emily had come from a troubled background, a little girl whose innocence had already been marred by neglect and hardship. She had been shuffled between different foster homes, each one more fleeting than the last. When she arrived at John's home, she was hesitant, withdrawn, and afraid. The emotional scars from her past were visible in the way she clung to herself, afraid to trust anyone. But John wasn't one to give up easily. In the beginning, their days were filled with awkward silences as Emily observed him from the corner of the room, unsure of whether she could trust him. John had always been patient, understanding the deep-rooted pain she carried. He never pushed her, but he offered her a steady presence in her chaotic world. Every day, John would greet her with a warm smile, his voice soft and reassuring. He didn't ask for much, just that she feel safe, feel loved, and understand that she had a place in his home. As the months passed, Emily began to open up. At first, it was small gestures, looking him in the eye, sitting a little closer at dinner, or even smiling when he would play her favorite games with her. John recognized the small steps, each one a victory in their journey together. But it wasn't just Emily who was changing. John, too, had started to feel something deeper, something more than just a foster parent bond. His love for her was undeniable, a love that went beyond the simple need to care for a child. He was becoming her protector, her confidant, and someone she could rely on. Yet, as much as their relationship grew, there was always that underlying tension. Emily knew she was just a temporary part of John's life. Deep down, she longed for permanence, a family that would never leave. And John knew that the day would come when the courts would make the final decision about her future. Would Emily remain with him, or would she be moved again? John had always hoped that Emily would find her forever family with him. He would often imagine what it would be like to adopt her, to officially call her his daughter. But the legal process was a maze of paperwork and bureaucracy, and though he was emotionally ready to adopt, he knew there was no guarantee. Each day, he prayed for the chance to keep her in his life. Despite their bond, John struggled with doubt. He often questioned if he was truly prepared to become a permanent father. Emily was still carrying the wounds of her past, and sometimes her emotional reactions were unpredictable. But what he didn't realize was that, in Emily's eyes, he had already become her father. She didn't need any piece of paper or legal document to tell her that John was the one who had always been there for her. He was the one who had loved her when no one else would. The adoption hearing was fast approaching, and the moment of truth was at hand. John knew that Emily was ready to make a decision about her future, but he also feared that the judge would see him as just another foster parent, someone who had done his job but wasn't worthy of a lifelong commitment. He couldn't imagine a life without Emily, but he didn't know how to convince the judge that they belonged together. As they entered the courtroom that day, both of them were filled with nerves. Emily had changed in so many ways since she arrived at John's home. She had become a confident and loving child, but she still had that quiet fear of abandonment deep inside her. John, though, was ready to give her everything he could offer: his love, his support, and his family. The judge called the room to order, and Emily was asked to step up to the witness stand. As she stood there, John's heart raced. He knew that whatever happened today would change their lives forever. He didn't know what Emily would say, but he hoped, with everything in him, that she would speak from the heart. And what she would say next would forever change the course of their lives together. The courtroom waited with bated breath. This was just the beginning of their long journey ahead. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Emily's life continued to unfold within the walls of John's home. What began as a tentative arrangement between a foster father and a frightened, uncertain little girl had blossomed into a deep and lasting bond. The love they shared was quiet but powerful, built on trust and patience that had been hard-earned by both of them. What seemed like an impossible beginning now seemed like a natural part of their lives. In the early days, Emily's fear of trusting again was evident. She had come from a background of instability, moving from one foster home to another, never truly able to put down roots or call any place home. It was this instability that had shaped her into the shy, withdrawn girl John first met. She had learned to protect herself from disappointment by keeping everyone at arm's length. She didn't know how to love without the fear of it being taken away. But John didn't give up. Every day, he showed Emily the love and stability she so desperately needed. He would wake her up with a warm smile, make her favorite breakfast, and talk to her about her day at school. He made it clear that no matter what, she was safe here with him. When she had a bad day or cried, John would hold her close, offering gentle words of comfort. And when Emily smiled, really smiled, it was as though the weight of her past was momentarily lifted. Those moments became treasures for John, small, quiet victories that were built on love and care. As the months passed, Emily began to slowly open up, piece by piece, like a flower blooming after a long winter. She started to express herself more freely. At first, it was just through actions, a hug, an unexpected thank you, or the way she would rush to show him a new drawing she had made. But soon, Emily's words started to match her actions. She would talk about her dreams, her hopes, and the things that made her happy. She started to ask John questions, something she hadn't done before. It was as if, with each passing day, she was beginning to believe that she could trust him, that he wasn't going anywhere. John, too, found himself changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. Becoming a father figure to Emily hadn't been easy, but it was a role he grew to embrace fully. He took on the responsibilities with love and patience, never once feeling like it was a burden. Each day with Emily was a gift, and he found joy in the simple moments. Teaching her how to ride a bike, helping her with her homework, and sharing stories from his own childhood became some of the most meaningful experiences of his life. These moments of connection were the building blocks of their relationship, and John began to see that his love for Emily wasn't just that of a foster parent. It was the love of a father for his daughter. Of course, there were challenges. Emily's emotional scars from her past didn't disappear overnight. Sometimes, she would lash out or retreat into herself when things became too overwhelming. John had to learn how to navigate these moments with care, knowing that it wasn't her fault. There were nights when she would cry herself to sleep, haunted by memories she couldn't quite shake, and there were days when she would push him away, unsure if she could truly let someone in again. But John never wavered. He knew the road to healing wasn't easy, but he also knew that Emily needed time, and most importantly, she needed consistency. During these challenging times, John sought the advice of therapists and attended support groups for foster parents. He wanted to make sure he was doing everything he could to help Emily heal. And with each new step forward, the bond between them grew even stronger. Emily began to confide in him, telling him about the things that scared her, the memories that haunted her, and the dreams she had for the future. And with every conversation, John reassured her that she was loved, no matter what. As the years passed, Emily flourished under John's care. She grew more confident in herself and more comfortable in her surroundings. She excelled in school, made friends, and found joy in the little things, like baking cookies together or watching their favorite TV shows. John never took any of these moments for granted. He knew that every step she took forward was a victory in their journey together. But there were still moments of uncertainty. Despite the years of care and love, Emily would sometimes ask questions that made John's heart ache. "Will I always be here with you, Daddy?" she would ask, looking up at him with those big, innocent eyes. It was then that John realized that the love he had for her was no longer just a temporary thing. It was permanent. He had already made the decision in his heart that he would do whatever it took to keep her with him, to make her feel like she was truly a part of his family. But he still feared that the courts might not agree. Though their love was strong, the journey wasn't over. John knew that there was still one final hurdle to overcome: the adoption hearing. He had to prove that he was the right person to give Emily the family she had always longed for. But as he looked at Emily, now a confident, loving young girl, he knew deep down that no matter what happened in that courtroom, they were already a family. And it was in that quiet, heartfelt truth that John found the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The day of the adoption hearing arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with nervous energy. John sat in the front row, his hands resting tightly on his knees, fingers slightly trembling. The weight of the moment was pressing down on him, and his mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts. Today was the day he would find out if the years he had spent raising Emily, the countless moments of love and care, would culminate in the most important decision of their lives. Would the court allow him to adopt her, or would their family be torn apart, leaving Emily to face an uncertain future once again? Beside him, Emily sat quietly, her small frame almost dwarfed by the oversized chair in the courtroom. She had come a long way since the first day they had met. No longer the shy, withdrawn girl who had arrived at his door years ago, Emily was now a confident young girl who had blossomed under John's care. She looked around the courtroom with wide eyes, taking in the unfamiliar setting. The tall walls, the serious faces of the judge and attorneys, and the rows of empty seats created an intimidating atmosphere. But she was there for one reason: to finally have a family of her own. John glanced down at her, his heart swelling with love. She was wearing the same dress she had worn when they first met. It was a simple dress, one that her mother had bought for her when she was just a little girl. But to John, it symbolized the journey they had been on together, a symbol of how far they had come. Emily's hair, neatly braided, framed her face as she glanced up at him with uncertain eyes. John could see the same vulnerability he had seen when she first came to him. But this time, there was something different. This time, he could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a hope that today, the court would say yes. The judge, a stern-looking woman who had heard countless cases like this before, called the hearing to order. As the proceedings began, John felt a tight knot form in his stomach. He knew the legal process was complex, and he was no stranger to the difficulty of the foster care system. Despite all the love and care he had given Emily, he knew that the judge would have to evaluate everything from their living situation to his ability to provide a stable future for her. The weight of the decision was heavy, and John couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. He had done everything he could to be the father Emily needed, but would it be enough in the eyes of the law? The attorneys spoke first, outlining the facts and the history of Emily's case. They talked about her early years in foster care, her emotional struggles, and the ups and downs of her previous placements. John listened carefully, his chest tightening with each mention of the difficult past Emily had endured. He hated hearing about the pain she had experienced, but he also knew that every piece of her past had led her to this moment, this room where everything could change. Then the judge turned to Emily. She was asked to come to the witness stand, where she was expected to speak about her feelings and wishes. John held his breath as Emily stood, walking slowly to the stand. His heart pounded in his chest as she took her seat, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, but there was also a quiet strength. This was the moment that could change everything for them. The judge addressed her kindly, asking, "Emily, would you like to tell the court how you feel about living with your foster dad?" The room fell silent, every person in the courtroom waiting for her response. Emily took a deep breath. her small chest rising and falling as she looked over at John. Then, in a voice so soft that it almost didn't reach the back of the room, she spoke. "I love him," she said, her voice trembling. "He's always been there for me. He makes me feel safe. I want to stay with him forever." John's heart skipped a beat. He had heard Emily say she loved him before, but hearing it in the courtroom, in front of the judge, made it feel like a declaration, a plea for her future. His eyes welled up with tears, and he wiped them away quickly, not wanting to lose composure in front of the court. Emily's words had hit him harder than he could have imagined. She wasn't just a foster child. She was his daughter in every sense of the word, and she wanted him to be her father, for life. The judge paused, her gaze softening as she looked at Emily. "You're very brave, Emily," she said, her tone warm. "Thank you for sharing your feelings with us." Emily nodded, her face flushed with emotion, but there was a small brave smile playing at the corner of her lips. For the first time during the hearing, John allowed himself to relax just a little. He had worried that this moment might break Emily, that she might falter under the pressure, but she hadn't. She had spoken from her heart, and that was all he could have hoped for. Now, it was out of his hands. The judge would make her decision, and all he could do was wait. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity, the only sound the scratching of pens as the judge reviewed the case. John sat there, holding his breath, as Emily's words echoed in his mind. He knew that what she had said was the truth. She loved him, and he loved her. They were a family, no matter what the court decided. But as the judge turned to face them, John could only wonder if the decision would be in their favor. The judge finally spoke, her voice firm but gentle. "After careful consideration, I believe that it is in the best interest of Emily to be adopted by John. I hereby approve the adoption petition." In that moment, everything changed. John's heart swelled with emotion, and he couldn't hold back the tears any longer. He reached for Emily, pulling her into his arms as she burst into tears of joy. They had made it. They were a family, officially, forever. The courtroom erupted in soft murmurs as the judge's words sank in, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. "I hereby approve the adoption petition," she had said, her voice firm yet compassionate. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. The noise of the courtroom, the murmurs of the spectators, and even the judge's gavel, all faded into the background as John and Emily looked at each other. The only sound that mattered in that moment was the thudding of John's heart in his chest, racing with the overwhelming emotion that had suddenly taken over. John stood up slowly, as if in disbelief, his knees weak beneath him. His hands, once trembling with anxiety, were now steady, reaching for the girl who had been his daughter all along, even before the judge's official ruling. As he gathered her into his arms, Emily buried her face in his chest, her sobs shaking her small body. She was no longer just a foster child, no longer someone on the brink of uncertainty. She was his daughter, forever. The years of waiting, the months of paperwork, and the emotional roller coaster of the foster care system had all led to this beautiful, life-changing moment. The words that had haunted John in his quiet moments, "Will I ever be enough?" had been answered with a resounding yes. Yes, he had been enough, and more. He had been her father, her protector, her guide. And now the court had recognized what they both knew deep down. They were a family, bound by love, not just by law. Tears filled John's eyes as he whispered, "I love you, Emily, always." He could feel the little girl's arms tighten around him, as if trying to hold on to that moment forever, to make sure it never slipped away. And for the first time in a long while, Emily didn't look afraid. The shadow of abandonment that had always lingered in her eyes had finally begun to fade. The past, the pain, the uncertainty, they were all becoming distant memories. In that moment, there was only love, only belonging. The judge smiled softly at the scene before her. She had seen many adoption hearings, but few as emotional and genuine as this one. She knew that this was not just the final step in a legal process. It was the beginning of something new and beautiful for both of them. As the courtroom slowly began to empty, the emotions continued to swirl around John and Emily. The gavel had already come down, but the real transformation had just begun. Later, when they left the courtroom hand in hand, John couldn't help but look at Emily, his heart swelling with pride. She was no longer just the scared little girl he had taken in years ago. She was his daughter in every way that mattered. And Emily, though overwhelmed with the gravity of it all, felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have to wonder anymore if she was wanted, if she belonged. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was home. The drive home felt different that day. It wasn't just the quiet hum of the car or the familiar streets they passed by. It was the knowledge that the future was now completely theirs to shape. There was no longer a possibility of separation, no more uncertainty about where she would be next year or who would be there for her. John was her forever, and she was his. Together, they had forged a bond that could not be broken. And that bond would be the foundation of everything that came next. As they arrived home, John lifted Emily out of the car, just as he had done countless times before. This time, though, it felt different. It wasn't just a father helping his daughter. This was the moment when their lives truly began together, side by side, for the rest of their days. Emily looked around their home with a newfound sense of comfort. She had once wondered if she would ever find a place where she truly belonged. Now she knew that this was it. This was her family, her place. Later that evening, as they sat down to dinner, John couldn't help but smile as Emily eagerly told him about her day. It was as though something had clicked inside her. She was no longer the quiet, fearful girl who had come into his life all those years ago. She was confident, strong, and filled with the hope of a future she had never dared to dream about before. "I'm so glad I get to stay with you," Emily said, her voice filled with a sincerity that touched John's heart. He reached over and squeezed her hand, his own emotions overflowing. "And I'm glad you're here, kiddo," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're stuck with me, now and forever." The words were simple, but they were filled with so much meaning. In that moment, John knew that their journey had only just begun. There were still challenges ahead, still moments of growth and learning to be had, but nothing would ever shake the foundation they had built together. Love had brought them to this point, and it would carry them forward, no matter what came next. As they finished their meal, Emily smiled up at him, a genuine, unguarded smile that spoke volumes. She was home, and for the first time in her life, she was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. Her story had changed, from one of uncertainty and fear to one of love, family, and belonging. And as John looked at the little girl who would become his daughter, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. They were a family, bound by love, and nothing would ever tear them apart again.